So, texture mapping. So I just want to sketch very basically what texture mapping is. Start with have some kind of geometry. Drawing a little 5-sided cylinder or something like that. Like this. And the idea is then that we can have an image and we can wrap it around the geometry. We can sort of put the image in 3D. I'm gonna just sketch something here, so some kind of image, and it really is just like wrapping a piece of paper around an object. That's a good analogy. So something like this. Switch the color. Of course, it's really a mathematical construct and not something physical like wrapping a piece of paper. So that means that, I mean, wrapping a piece of paper would obviously be quite difficult. I mean, it's possible to do here with this cylinder. It's not difficult to wrap a piece of paper around it if it's the right size and stuff like that. But if we have a more complex object, then it starts to get really tricky to do that. And sometimes it's completely impossible. And actually, many of the same problems apply for texture mapping. So when you build geometry in Maya or Max, then this is a whole area that has a lot of tools to it to just how to wrap a texture around an object. Yeah. Then we have the textures all wrapped around this object. Draw this like this. And we call this texture mapped geometry. Oops. Like this. Okay. Let's look at something a little more interesting. I know it's kind of self-explanatory, but just so that everyone is on the same page. So in order to do that with graphics programming and math, we define something called texture coordinates. And the texture coordinates are used to describe how the texture should be wrapped around the 3D object. Yeah. So let's draw a small bitmap. Just turn this on again. This is a very small texture, fortunately. texture image. And then we can of course index the pixels. So we can put some numbers on this to reference each pixel on the texture image. And it will be you need 2 coordinates to define which pixel you're talking about, right? Because it's a 2D image. Oops. So pixels on a texture, and we call those texels. You see that word quite a lot. It just means pixels on a texture as opposed to pixels on the screen. 2 different things, and sometimes you can get confused about these, and it's important not to be. So therefore, there's another word for the pixels on the texture. And these numbers I wrote here, we can call those texel coordinates. Use a different color for that. Okay. They are kind of texture coordinates, but they are not what we mean when you say the word texture coordinates. So it's just another way of having a coordinate system on the texture. But of course, what we normally mean when we say the word texture coordinates is what we could also call UV coordinates. And this is actually very similar to the texel coordinate. It's just a normalized version. So we normalize these. Instead of going from 0 to the number of pixels minus 1, we always go from 0 to 1 on this axis, on both axes actually. And that is UV coordinates. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just normalized differently. Now, to be precise, we're actually referencing the centers of the pixels here with the coordinates, but I'm not going to go too much into that right now. So it suffice to say that we have the U coordinate goes from 0 to 1 on this axis to span the entire texture, and similarly on the other axis. And I think also I wrote that texture coordinates. I think these 2 words are used a bit interchangeably, so sometimes people say texture coordinates and sometimes people say UV coordinates. And that means the same in all practical senses. And they are simply normalized texel coordinates. Let's put one arrow here, so these pixels, it's like single pixels. And like this. Okay. So with UV coordinates we can do something called UV mapping or texture mapping. Again, the words are used interchangeably. I think UV mapping is a little more, it's a better word to use. I'm just going to copy a small image from the first slide. So first we're going to simplify a little bit by only considering a single triangle. And what happens to that? Everything. The same, of course, happens to all the triangles in this object. So the object is composed of a number of triangles. So we just pick what could be a triangle on the, maybe a little, that. It could maybe be this. Oh, that was pretty quick. Yeah. And that, of course, has part of the texture on it. So something like this. It's kind of cut off, right? This shows part of the texture. I'll displace it on the object when it's rendered. Put some designations on these vertices. Just remember that the points are called vertices. And the triangle is, of course, comprised of 3 vertices. We'll call those VA, VB, VC. So, in order to map the texture onto this triangle, we define UV coordinates for each vertex. Maternity. So we simply decide where on the texture each vertex should be mapped. Something like this, yeah. And to make something that that matches what we see here, I'm just gonna choose some coordinates here. UV coordinates 0, 0. And for this vertex, we choose 0.5, 0. Finally, 0, 1. Yeah, I'm just gonna grab the grid from this. Actually, we can do something like this. So the texture, I'm just gonna draw this fantastic red pattern. Oops. So this is the texture. And what it does is we can draw the triangle on the texture now using the UV coordinates. So not the geometric coordinates, but the UV coordinates. And that can, of course, be in different places. Now we just say that it's here. It could also have been over here or somewhere else on the texture. It's just a little part of the texture, because remember that we want the entire texture to wrap around the object. So for this triangle, it's of course just a little part. I'll just put this designation down here. UV coordinates. There. So once again, we're just considering this one triangle. The entire object is of course drawn with similar triangles, but this one triangle, and the way the text is mapped on this particular triangle, this mapping is actually defined by these coordinates at each vertex and nothing else. So once we choose these coordinates, then there is a definite way to map the texture for the graphics hardware. And we can draw the triangle in what we call UV space. So it's not geometric space, this is sort of geometric space or Euclidean space, you could say, and this is the UV space, which is a two-dimensional space. And of course the texture is sort of lives in this space, and we can draw the triangle to see which part of the texture. And if you, in many modeling tools, when you do texture mapping, you have a UV mapping tool where you can move around vertices on top of the texture, which looks similar to this. And let me just check, I think. Yes. So now I have a few questions for you to do on texture mapping. So they are on the Moodle page on workshop 3, and the exercises are here, so just skip those and let's write this one.